Brazen.
Previously on Dynamite Doug.
If this object was stolen, what else might be stolen that we have?
I don't see her as a deliberate international criminal, not at all. But she colluded.
How this standard can go from Cambodia to US or to another country? How?
Gokor, 2007.
My name is Simon Warwick, and I am British and Italian nationality now. I live in Italy and have done for 30 years. And I've worked all my life as a stone conservator.
Simon Warwick has a mop of gray hair and a job working to preserve ancient stone buildings. He started on medieval churches and by 2007 could often be seen traipsing through jungle temples in Cambodia in a linen shirt and a wide-brimmed hat. A sort of British Indiana Jones.
I was visiting a number of temples in this very large site called Kokar. Kokar was the capital of the Angkorian Empire for a short period under one of the kings, Jayavarman IV. And he built an extraordinary site that consists of a giant pyramid that looks like the Mexican pyramids. I was wandering around, and as stone people do, was looking at every crack and fragment and taking hundreds of pictures, when I came across two sets of feet sticking out of the forest floor.
Two stone feet without a statue attached. Simon didn't think too much of it at the time. He was just taking photos, documenting another lost Khmer temple.
About several weeks later, I was in the library of the École Française, which is based in Paris. And I was looking through some of the books and actually just to see what Kokar sculpture looked like, when I came across what turned out to be the Latchford book.
That's right. Adoration and Glory, the same book written by Emma Bunker and Douglas Latchford.
They're wonderful. They're some of the finest sculptures you can see.
As Simon turned the page, he was hit by a bolt of recognition. There was a glossy picture of a life-size stone figure, 5 feet tall, 500 pounds, legs akimbo like a wrestler ready to grapple an opponent.
And lo and behold, there was a great big sculpture with no feet. Well, lots of sculptures have no feet, but I thought, well, that looks quite similar.
Simon scanned the photo of the sculpture on his computer and overlaid it with his own photo of the feet from Gokor.
I literally photoshopped them together. It wasn't exactly high tech. And by incredible good fortune, I'd taken the photograph from the same angle and it fitted. And it was very obviously the feet of that sculpture.
Simon was intrigued. He looked at the book. The statue, identified as a temple wrestler, was sitting in the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena. He then realized it must have been stolen, hacked off by looters. He wrote a 2-page report, which he sent to the Cambodian government and the UN.
I certainly didn't imagine that it would have this domino effect, this butterfly, the butterfly flapping its wings at one end of the planet, and suddenly all these other things happening.
This is Dynamite Doug, a podcast from Project Brazen and PRX. And I'm Ellen Wong. He didn't know it, but Simon's lucky break set in motion a series of events that would finally bring some serious scrutiny to Douglas and Emma. Denver, 2007. As Simon pieced together his clues, Emma Bunker, now 77 years old, was enjoying her new power in the art world. After her book with Douglas came out, Emma became well known in the field of Khmer studies, often called on to give public lectures. In her talks, Emma assumed a woman of the world persona, comfortable discussing sex and giving the impression she enjoyed a good time. Here, she is discussing apsaras, the nymphs of Hindu and Buddhist mythology.
Apsaras are really a product of the Cambodian Tourist Association with the Apsara dance at every hotel you go to. And I think there weren't a lot of great Apsaras in the Khmer Empire. But they certainly make good entertainment at cocktail hour in Cambodia.
And then she veers off into talk about tantric sex.
I think Westerners are always a little startled that in some facets of Tantric Buddhism, copulation and the consummation of the sexual act has some interpretation on achieving oneness with God, the ecstasy of it all.
In private, Emma was also growing ever more pleased with the power bestowed by Douglas. She wasn't just called on for public lectures. Behind the scenes, she was playing an important role in Douglas's ecosystem. When a new employee joined the auction house Sotheby's as a vice president of Southeast Asian art in New York, Emma emailed Douglas about how they needed to ensure her evaluations of art were to their liking. That is, on the pricey side. Here's an actor reading her email.
I know we have said it again and again. These pieces are so rare, etc., that they cannot be evaluated by some little auction chickie-poo who got promoted from clerk recently. What I am proposing is to educate her, program her mind, and make her our own creature. Then she can be controlled.
Emma jokes that a well-known architect in New York who worked on apartments of Douglas's clients should seduce the Sotheby's executive. A light kiss on the back of the neck, a hand brushed here and there, and a little more verbal charm, and you've got her, she wrote. Then Emma makes a startling admission to Douglas. He had controlled her, so now they should work together to control the Sotheby's executive.
You were very successful with me. But lucky for you, I'm smart, good company, never boring, seldom screw up, and always do as I'm told, with a few micro exceptions. Tee-hee. Anyway, I fear if she gets demoted, we could get someone much worse. And she's fun enough, and perhaps fixable.
The evidence we have, based on Douglas's emails, is that Emma, by this point, is all in. Another email is even more damning. Emma writes to Douglas that she's just found a bunch of old letterheads for Spink & Son and other auction houses. She suggests they could use them to write fake provenances for artifacts. That is, pretending items had been sold years ago before the 1970 UNESCO cutoff date, when in fact they had been acquired more recently.
Went through all the old files in the Denver apartment and found all sorts of letterhead. I think we could be in business for quite a while and sell anything you want at auction.
She signs off.
What a giant hoot. Giggles and more giggles.
This is a tipping point in our story. Emma is no longer simply writing academic articles, helping legitimize Douglas. She's conspiring to break international law by falsifying provenance documents, enabling Douglas to illegally sell looted Khmer statues to rich people and museums. Nancy Weiner, the dealer who by now had taken over her mother Doris's New York art dealership, claimed Douglas told her he gave bronze statues to Emma in return for false provenances, according to U.S. court documents. But Emma had been wealthy and privileged from the very start, so why take such a deep plunge into this whole operation? Was it simply greed? Maybe she was addicted to the power? Or perhaps she was in love? Her husband, John, had died in 2005, and Douglas, as she acknowledged herself, only half-jokingly, had come to control her. Douglas even signed his emails to her as Bong, a Khmer honorific that he used to refer to himself. When they talked on the phone, even about something as simple as travel arrangements to see him in Bangkok, Emma sounded deferential.
But I'm still sort of planning to come sort of sometime early in October. I'm just waiting to see.
Will you go to Phnom Penh first or come here first?
I'll go to Hong Kong and then Phnom Penh and there. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Even until today, with all that's happened, few in the art world know the extent of Emma's involvement with Douglas. They think her wrongdoing, if anything, extends only to writing academic articles.
I don't know how much he told her. It's just very hard to read that because she simply denied any accusations against him. She said they're simply not true.
Dawn Rooney, the scholar, was close to her, but she's still unsure about whether Emma knew Douglas was corrupt.
I mean, I knew her as well as anyone personally, in the art world at least, and I can't read that.
New York, 2010. It was 3 years after Simon Warwick, the stone conservator, had written his report on the Kokor statue, the temple wrestler. Nothing had really changed. Douglas returned a few lesser statues, but the Cambodian government had no idea how to take on a powerful museum like the Norton Simon in Pasadena. And then...
Gradually, very gradually, things started to move. Actually, things really only moved when the second pair of feet turned out to have an accompanying body, because a sculpture came up for sale at Sotheby's, and it turned out to be the body to the other pair of feet.
The statue Simon had identified in the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena turned out to be one of a Hindu god called Bhima, not a temple wrestler. And it was one of a pair of statues that had once stood in the Kokor temple complex. The other statue of the Hindu god, Duryodhana, had also been ripped out by looters, leaving its feet in situ. Like Simon, French archaeologist Eric Bourdonnais had identified the piece by comparing the feet to a photo of the statue. It just so happened that this statue was on the block for auction at Sotheby's, and Emma Bunker had been called in to write the catalog entry, says Lois Demenil, her friend.
There was a point at which there was going to be that big auction at Sotheby's. I got a telephone call from Emmy, and she had been contacted by Sotheby's, who wanted her to give an expertise. So she said, well, what do you think? And I could tell she was kind of upset and ruffled by it, both tempted because they were treating her as a scholar, and then on the other hand, scared.
Sotheby's had come to Emma and Douglas to help trace the provenance of the statue. Amid the heightened scrutiny, the auction house was worried it might have been stolen, and Emma and Douglas had a problem. Back in the early 1970s, Douglas had acquired the Duryodhana and Bhima statues from looters and then conspired with representatives of Spink & Son, the London auction house, to falsify export licenses for them. In 1975, Spink sold the Duryodhana statue to a Belgian businessman whose widow was now looking to sell. In an email, Emma told the Sotheby's executive that Cambodia's government had been made aware that the statue's feet were still in situ in Kokor, evidence it had been looted. She urged Sotheby's to be careful, perhaps not mentioning the feet in its catalog. The Duryodhana was the star piece of Sotheby's upcoming sale, expected to fetch up to $3 million. The auction house looked for ways to proceed. One Sotheby's executive wrote in an email that they could get Douglas to say he'd owned the statue in the 1960s, before the UNESCO rules came in. a provenance that many buyers demanded. Douglas at first told Sotheby's he had the Duryodhana in London in 1970, but then Emma, in an email, advised him to deny any involvement at all with the statues.
I think maybe you shouldn't be known to have been associated with the Kokor guardian figures. Let's just fudge a little and just put the blame squarely on Spink.
Douglas heeded this advice, changing his story and falsely telling Sotheby's he'd never owned the Duryodhana, a claim he repeated in tapes for the 2014 documentary.
I don't know where they imagined that I owned the piece, but let me confirm to you first that I did not own the piece and I did not sell it to Spinks. There is evidence to that effect to prove that.
This is not true, according to a 2019 criminal indictment of Douglas. And Emma was caught up in helping push these falsehoods. Sotheby's now didn't have the pre-1970 provenance to facilitate a sale. Despite this, the auction house pushed on.
Well, it was quite a walk, and I had never been anywhere beyond the sort of public bits of that Sotheby's establishment.
Helen Jessup, the scholar of Southeast Asian art, had been invited to look at the statue at Sotheby's on New York's Upper East Side.
And we went through a huge room where everything conceivable under the sun was coming up for some kind of auction in the future. It must have been thousands of objects. We walked through that and walked into a separate room where the Duryodhana was standing alone. My jaw metaphorically dropped when I saw it. And I walked around it and I thought, oh my God, where did this come from?
Helen was shocked that such a priceless piece of Cambodian heritage was on the auction block.
So I was really flabbergasted. And I got home and I telephoned Hap Tuk.
Hap Tuk is a senior official in Cambodia's culture ministry.
So I telephoned him and said, there's a very important piece coming up at Sotheby's and I think you should intervene.
At the 11th hour, the Cambodian government stepped in, writing to Sotheby's to demand the cancellation of the auction and the return of the statue. Initially, Sotheby's was defiant, refusing to hand the statue back to Cambodia, saying there were no legal grounds for the claim. But under pressure, it did withdraw the Duryodhana from auction. In a statement to us, Sotheby's said it had told the Cambodian government of the sale but had received no reply. When finally contacted by the Cambodian government, Sotheby's said it, quote, promptly withdrew the piece from auction, unquote. Sotheby's further pointed out, the U.S. government later cleared the auction house of wrongdoing, and it said Emma Bunker later changed her mind, saying the statue had been acquired legally and could be sold. Meanwhile, at the urging of Helen, Hap Tuk had gotten in touch with a special agent at the Department of Homeland Security. The U.S. government was now on the case.
We, historically have done quite a few cultural patrimony cases. We've returned objects to Peru, to Italy, to Mongolia. Those are usually dinosaur bones.
Jessica Feinstein is co-chief of a money laundering unit in the Southern District of New York in Manhattan. Her office handles civil and criminal cases involving art theft, building on investigations carried out by the Department of Homeland Security.
We learned about an object that was going up for auction in 2011 at Sotheby's auction house. And it was a Khmer stone antiquity, monumental in size, called the Duryodhana. And I believe we were approached by the Cambodians who had noticed it in the auction catalog and were concerned that it had been stolen from Cambodia.
Sotheby's had canceled the auction, but still refused to give the piece back. So the Cambodians asked Jessica's office to seize the piece and return it.
We ultimately ended up filing what's called a civil forfeiture action. It's not a criminal process. And what happened was Sotheby's, the auction house, initially engaged us in litigation over whether the United States would have been able to take title to the piece and then return it ultimately to Cambodia.
Sotheby's was claiming the statue was rightly owned by the widow of the Belgian industrialist. The auction house's decision to fight the U.S. government in court was terrible for Douglas.
So through the civil discovery process, we were able to gather evidence, documents from Sotheby's as well as other places. So Sotheby's went to Douglas Latchford and asked him, essentially, when did this piece come out of Cambodia? What can you tell us about that? And what we were able to see is that he lied to Sotheby's. He said that he had it in London in 1970, and in fact, we know it came out from Gake in 1972.
When the civil suit became public, Douglas, identified in court papers as the collector, was named in the international media. Seeking to limit the damage, he gave an interview to the New York Times in which he again denied owning the statue. If the French and other Western collectors had not preserved this art, what would be the understanding of Khmer culture today? He said. This old colonialist line was wearing pretty thin. Douglas also sat for an interview with the documentary team in which he derided the U.S. investigators.
Their imagination has gone wild. They've seen too many Indiana Jones films. As far as I know, there is no such thing as a smuggling network, and I certainly don't belong to any smuggling network.
It's a crime to steal a statue from a temple? Or?
It depends whether it was stolen from a temple or whether it was in a private collection prior to that. I don't know.
And he pretended to have changed from his 1950s self.
I would be much more cautious if I found something in a shop in Thailand or in Christie's or in London or in New York or wherever, that I would make much more certain that the piece had not been stolen.
This was supposed to be a PR offensive to combat the U.S. allegations. But the interviewer keeps pressing Douglas. Eventually, his PR team steps in.
Yeah, as you like it, okay.
No, I'll answer. I have nothing to hide.
The genie was out of the bottle. But Douglas, now in his early 80s, had no intention of changing. Even after the Sotheby's debacle, he continued to sell looted statues, as we'll hear in the next episode. But after decades of getting away with it, Douglas Latchford finally was on U.S. law enforcement's radar.
So through the civil process, that was our first window into Douglas Latchford and his dealings.
The U.S. government was fighting Sotheby's in court over the statue, but prosecutors were starting to focus on Douglas. Soon, this would no longer be simply a civil matter.
So we began a criminal investigation into Douglas Latchford as a result of that case.
Coming up on Dynamite Doug.
We were just fortunate that actually people involved in the looting network were still alive and willing to speak with us.
I think those pieces probably will circulate again.
He made one mistake.
It's the start for my thinking how Cambodia can get back this statue to our country.
Dynamite Doug is a production of Project Brazen in partnership with PRX. It's hosted by me, Ellen Wong. Tom Wright and Bradley Hope are executive producers. Sandy Smallins is the executive producer for Audiation. Tom Wright wrote the script, with reporting from Timothy McLaughlin and Evan Moffat. Joanne Levine is the story editor. Mariangel Gonzalez and Nicholas Brennan are senior producers. Matthew Rubenstein is the producer. Mix and music by Bang Music and Audio Post. Theme by Paul Vidolins. Underscore by Timo Elliston, Brian Jones, and Paul Vidolins. Lucy Woods is head of research. Ryan Ho is the creative director for the project, with cover art designed by Julien Pradier. The production coordinator for Audiation is Selena C. Reynolds. Voice actors are Sok Sambath, Jeremiah Putnam, Lois Allen Lilly, and Richard Trapp. If you like this episode, please be sure to tell a friend, or rate and review it wherever you listen.
Audiation.